The story begins in a small courtroom in a quiet American town. The morning sun slipped through the tall windows, casting long stripes of light across the wooden floor. The smell of old paper and polished wood filled the air. Everyone in the room could feel the tension. It was one of those moments when time seemed to slow down, and even the soft sound of shuffling papers felt loud. The divorce case between Laura and her husband, Eric, had brought many to watch. People whispered quietly, waiting for the next outburst. Laura sat at one table, her hands clasped together, her eyes fixed on the floor. She wore a plain blue dress, her hair neatly tied back. Her face was pale, not from fear but from exhaustion. She had been through months of emotional pain, and today was the final step. Across the room sat Eric, her husband of 15 years. His suit was sharp, his expression cold. He looked proud, confident, and almost smug, as if the courtroom were his stage and he was performing for an audience. Their daughter, Lily, sat quietly on the wooden bench at the back. She was only 15 but looked older that day. Her eyes were red from crying the night before. In her hands, she held a small white envelope, folded neatly, her fingers gripping it tightly. Inside that envelope was a letter she had written herself. No one knew about it, not even her mother. It was her secret. She didn't know if she would ever use it, but she carried it anyway. It was her way of holding on to something honest in a room full of arguments and lies. Eric stood up when the judge, a middle-aged man named Judge Harper, asked him to speak. Eric's voice was calm at first, but it carried a sharp edge. He began to talk about money, about how much he had earned, how much he had given, and how much Laura had failed to do. His words were meant to sound logical, but they carried something cruel underneath. He talked about Laura's part-time job at the library, about how she could barely manage bills, about how she was too soft to raise their daughter properly. The people in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably. Some looked down, others exchanged glances. Judge Harper sat quietly, his face still, his hands folded on the desk in front of him. He had seen many families fall apart, but there was something painful about this one. Eric continued, growing louder, more confident with each word. He mocked Laura for not having a better job, for not being strong enough to move on. His tone was almost sarcastic, like he enjoyed showing everyone how superior he was. Laura kept her eyes on the table. She didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't even look at Eric. Her silence made him even bolder. He smiled slightly, as if he had one. Lily watched her father and felt something deep inside her twist and break. She had always known he could be mean, but seeing him talk like that about her mother in front of strangers was worse than she had imagined. Her mother had worked long nights, skipped meals, and smiled through tears just to keep things normal for her. And now, he was tearing all of that apart with words that sounded smooth but cut like knives. The courtroom grew quiet when Eric finally stopped talking. Judge Harper nodded slowly, then turned his eyes toward Laura. "Do you wish to respond, Mrs. Carter?" he asked gently. Laura lifted her eyes for the first time. Her voice was soft, shaking a little. "I have nothing to say, Your Honor." "He can say whatever he wants." She tried to smile, but it faded quickly. She looked down again, her hands trembling slightly. Lily's heart hurt watching her mother like that. She wanted to stand up, to say something, to tell everyone the truth. But fear held her down. She looked around the courtroom. Reporters whispered quietly. A woman in the front row shook her head. Her father leaned back in his chair, satisfied. Her mother sat small and broken. The judge scribbled notes, looking thoughtful. And there she was, a teenager with a letter in her hand that might not mean anything at all, or might mean everything. She remembered the night before, sitting on her bed under the small lamp. The words had poured out of her without stopping. She didn't write about laws or money or who was right. She wrote about her mother making pancakes every Sunday even when she was tired. She wrote about the nights her mom stayed up late to help her with homework. She wrote about how her mom never complained when her dad was away for days. It was all small stuff, but to her, it was everything. Now, as she sat there, the letter felt heavy in her hands. Her heart beat fast. She wanted to stand up, to hand it to the judge, but she was afraid. What if they laughed? What if her dad got angry? What if it didn't help at all? But then she looked at her mom again, sitting there, quiet and humiliated, and something inside her shifted. Maybe the letter wasn't for her dad or the judge. Maybe it was for her mom, a way to remind her that someone still saw her strength. Judge Harper looked around the room again. The silence was long and uncomfortable. If there is nothing else, he said, preparing to move forward. But before he could continue, Lily's hand moved. Slowly, carefully, she raised the envelope, her heart racing. Her voice was small, almost shaking, but clear. "Your Honor," she said, "I have something I want you to read." The entire courtroom turned toward her. Her father frowned. Her mother's eyes widened in shock. Judge Harper looked surprised, his pen pausing in midair. Lily stood up, her knees trembling. The envelope shook slightly in her hand, but she didn't back down. She walked slowly toward the front of the room, feeling hundreds of eyes on her. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her steps were steady. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure: she couldn't stay silent anymore. The night before the hearing, the house was quiet. Only the sound of rain tapping against the kitchen window broke the silence. Laura sat at the table, staring at the cup of tea in front of her. The steam had faded long ago, but she didn't seem to notice. Her hands were wrapped around the cup as if holding it gave her strength. The clock on the wall ticked slowly. Tomorrow would decide everything. Lily stood by the door, watching her mother. She had never seen her look so tired. Laura's shoulders were slumped, her eyes red. It wasn't just the case that wore her down, it was years of trying to stay strong, of pretending things were fine when they weren't. Lily wanted to say something, to comfort her, but the words didn't come out. She hated how small and helpless she felt. After a long pause, Laura finally spoke. "You should go to bed, sweetheart," she said softly, forcing a small smile. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Lily nodded but didn't move. "Mom," she asked quietly, "are you scared?" Laura took a deep breath and stared at the dark window. "A little," she admitted. "But not for me. I just want what's fair. That's all." Her voice trembled slightly, and she quickly looked down, pretending to take a sip of her cold tea. Lily knew her mother wasn't just scared of losing the case. She was scared of losing her dignity, her peace, and the small pieces of hope she had left. Eric had taken so much already. He had taken her trust, her laughter, and the warmth that used to fill their home. When Lily finally went to her room, she sat on the edge of her bed for a long time. The rain had stopped, and the world outside was quiet again. She stared at her school notebooks, her pen scattered across the desk, and a blank sheet of paper. Her thoughts swirled. She remembered all the times her mom had stayed up late to help her with projects, how she would make pancakes in the morning even when she had to rush to work, and how she would always find a way to smile, even when things were bad. Lily picked up her pen and started to write. At first, she didn't know what to say. But once she started, the words poured out like a flood. She wrote about how her mom never gave up, how she always found a way to fix things, and how she had taught her that kindness was stronger than anger. She wrote about the small things that made her mom special, the way she hummed while cooking, the way she cried quietly when no one was looking, and the way she still told Lily that her father loved her, even when he didn't act like it. She didn't write it to impress anyone. She wrote it because she needed to. Because she couldn't stand to see her mom being treated like she didn't matter. She wanted the world to know the truth about her mother, the truth that money and pride could never cover. By the time she finished, the clock read past midnight. The letter was long and messy, with ink smudges and uneven lines. But it was honest. She folded it carefully and slipped it into a small white envelope. She stared at it for a moment before tucking it under her pillow. She wasn't sure if she would ever give it to anyone, but somehow, knowing it was there made her feel braver. The next morning came too soon. The air was cold and heavy. Laura woke up early, moving quietly around the kitchen. She made breakfast, though neither of them ate much. Lily noticed how her mom tried to act normal, talking about school and the weather, pretending nothing big was about to happen. But every few seconds, Laura's eyes would wander to the clock and her voice would fade. When it was time to leave, Laura looked at her daughter and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "No matter what happens," she said softly, "you remember that I love you. Okay?" Lily nodded and hugged her tightly. "I love you too, Mom." The drive to the courthouse was quiet. The sky was gray, and the streets were wet from the night's rain. Lily watched the world pass by through the car window, her thoughts spinning. She reached into her pocket and touched the envelope she had taken with her. It felt heavier now, as if it carried more than just words. When they arrived, the parking lot was already half full. Reporters stood outside, holding cameras. A few curious neighbors whispered near the entrance. Laura straightened her coat and took a deep breath. "Let's go," she said quietly. Inside, everything felt too big and too cold. The walls were white, the benches wooden and hard. They sat together at one of the tables near the front. Eric hadn't arrived yet. For a brief moment, there was peace. Then, as the door opened and he walked in, that peace vanished. His expression was calm, almost smug, as if he already knew how the day would end. Lily's heart pounded as she looked down at her lap, her fingers brushing against the envelope once more. She didn't know when or how, but deep down, she felt that this letter would matter. Maybe not for the court, maybe not for the judge, but for her mother. It was her way of fighting back, in the only way she knew how. She took a deep breath and looked at her mother. Laura gave her a small, reassuring smile. The judge entered moments later, and everyone rose. The case began, and the courtroom filled with the sound of papers, voices, and quiet tension. Lily sat still, the envelope hidden in her hand, waiting for the right moment. The letter wasn't just words anymore. It was her voice, and she was ready to use it when the time came. The courtroom was full that morning. The low hum of voices echoed off the high ceilings as people found their seats. Some were there out of curiosity, others because they knew the family. Laura sat beside her lawyer, her hands resting neatly on her lap. She looked calm on the outside, but her heart raced. Across from her sat Eric, confident as always, his tie perfectly straight, his smirk firmly in place. He whispered something to his lawyer and then glanced at Laura, almost daring her to meet his eyes. She didn't. Lily sat behind them, watching everything. The envelope was hidden inside her small purse, but she could feel its corners pressing against her hand. Her stomach twisted as she looked at her father. He looked like he belonged there, calm, proud, and sure of himself. Her mother looked small beside him, almost fragile. Lily wished she could make her mom look strong again, the way she remembered her from years ago when she would laugh easily and hum while cooking breakfast. But now, that laughter seemed so far away. Judge Harper entered the courtroom, his black robe sweeping behind him. The room fell silent as everyone stood. He took his seat, adjusted his glasses, and looked over the files in front of him. "We'll begin," he said simply. The lawyers started first, their voices calm but sharp, trading facts and statements that felt cold and distant. Eric's lawyer painted him as the responsible parent, the one with a steady job, a big house, and financial security. Laura's lawyer spoke quietly but firmly, talking about stability, love, and what was best for Lily. But Eric's side dominated most of the conversation. He had evidence, photos, and income records, all neatly presented. He looked pleased every time the judge nodded. When it was Eric's turn to speak, he stood with confidence. His voice carried through the room, smooth but heavy with pride. He talked about how he worked hard, how he had built a successful business, and how he could give Lily a better future. Then his tone changed. He started to talk about Laura, not kindly. He said she was unmotivated, too emotional, and irresponsible with money. He laughed softly as he mentioned how she had forgotten to pay a bill once or how she worked at a small-town library. The courtroom shifted uneasily. Even the clerk looked uncomfortable. Lily felt her face grow hot. Her hands balled into fists. Every word from her father felt like a slap. She couldn't understand how someone could say such things about the person who had cared for them both for years. She glanced at her mother. Laura was staring down, her lips pressed together. She didn't defend herself. She didn't argue. She just sat still, letting the storm pass over her. The judge watched carefully but didn't interrupt. When Eric finished, he leaned back in his chair with a satisfied look, as if the case was already won. The room was quiet for a moment until Judge Harper turned to Laura. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "do you wish to respond?" Laura took a deep breath and stood slowly. "Your Honor," she said softly, "I won't argue with most of what he said. I've made mistakes. I don't have a big house or a perfect job. But I love my daughter, and I've done my best. That's all I can say." Her voice shook slightly, but it carried a strength that didn't need to be loud. She sat down, and for a moment, no one spoke. The silence stretched on, heavy and sad. Eric rolled his eyes and muttered something under his breath. The judge tapped his pen and looked thoughtful. Lily's heart pounded. She couldn't take it anymore. Her father's words echoed in her head, but so did her mother's silence. She reached into her purse and touched the envelope again. Her fingers trembled, but this time she didn't pull back. She knew this was the moment. She couldn't just sit and watch. She had to do something. She stood up slowly. Her chair creaked, breaking the quiet. Everyone turned to look at her. Her father frowned. Her mother looked confused. Judge Harper raised an eyebrow. Lily took a small step forward. "Your Honor," she said in a soft but steady voice, "I have something I'd like you to read." The judge looked at her kindly. "Who are you, young lady?" "I'm Lily Carter," she said, her hands gripping the envelope tightly. "I'm their daughter." The judge nodded. "All right, Lily. What is it you have?" "It's a letter," she said. "I wrote it myself. It's about my mom. I think you should see it." Eric immediately stood up. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. She's a child. This isn't relevant to." Judge Harper raised his hand to stop him. "Mr. Carter, sit down. I'll decide what's relevant." His tone was calm but firm. Eric hesitated, glaring at his daughter before sitting back down, clearly annoyed. The judge gestured toward Lily. "You may approach." Lily's legs felt weak as she walked to the front. The sound of her footsteps echoed through the courtroom. She handed the envelope to the judge with shaking hands. "Thank you," he said gently. "Is it all right if I read this now?" Lily nodded, unable to speak. Her throat felt tight. She walked back to her seat and sat beside her mother, who still looked stunned. Laura reached out and held her hand. Neither of them said a word. Judge Harper opened the envelope carefully. The paper inside was folded neatly, the handwriting uneven but clear. He began to read silently at first. The room was completely still. The tension was so heavy that even the ticking of the courtroom clock seemed louder. Eric looked impatient, tapping his fingers on the table. But then something unexpected happened. The judge's lips twitched. A small smile appeared, then another. And before anyone could understand why, a soft laugh escaped him. The entire courtroom froze. The judge was laughing. Eric's face went red with confusion and anger. Laura looked terrified, unsure if it was good or bad. Lily just sat there, staring, her heart thumping wildly. She had no idea what part of the letter had made him laugh, but she hoped, deep down, that it wasn't cruel laughter. She hoped it was something good. Judge Harper cleared his throat, still smiling. He looked up at Lily and said, "I think everyone here needs to hear this." The courtroom grew completely still as Judge Harper unfolded Lily's letter. His eyes scanned the first few lines, and then a soft chuckle escaped his lips again. People began whispering, unsure of what was going on. Laura sat frozen, her heart racing. Eric looked irritated, drumming his fingers on the table. Lily sat quietly beside her mother, afraid to breathe. She didn't know what the judge was thinking, but she hoped he understood her words the way she meant them. Judge Harper adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "I think," he said slowly, his voice filled with warmth, "that everyone in this room could use a little perspective. And I believe this letter provides just that." He lifted the page and began to read out loud. "Dear Judge," he began, his tone calm and steady. "My name is Lily Carter, and I'm 15 years old. I know I'm not supposed to have a say in court things, but I wanted you to know what my mom is really like. She's not perfect, but she's the best person I know. My mom works 2 jobs, and she still finds time to make pancakes every Sunday. She fixes things when they break, even if she has no idea how. Once, she fixed a leaky pipe with duct tape and a spoon, and somehow, it worked." Laughter rippled softly through the courtroom. Even the bailiff smiled. Laura covered her mouth, her face flushing. Eric rolled his eyes and muttered something under his breath, but no one paid attention to him. Judge Harper continued reading, his smile growing wider. "She always tells me that everything will be okay, even when she's the one crying in the kitchen after I go to bed. She never says bad things about my dad, even when he forgets my birthday or when he yells at her. She says he's just busy. But I see things. I see how hard she tries, and how she never gives up. I see how she still packs my lunch with a note that says love you even when she's late for work. And I want you to know that if love and effort counted more than money, my mom would already have everything." There was a long silence. The laughter had faded into quiet sniffles. A woman in the front row dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Laura couldn't hold back her tears anymore. They streamed down her face, and she didn't even try to hide them. Lily's fingers tightened around her mother's hand. She hadn't expected everyone to hear her words like this, but now that they had, she was glad. Judge Harper's voice softened as he reached the next part. "My dad says Mom can't take care of me like he can, but he doesn't know what that means. He doesn't know that sometimes the best care isn't a new phone or fancy clothes, it's when someone stays up all night just to make sure you don't feel alone. My mom does that. She may not be rich, but she's real. She's brave, even when she's scared. And if this letter makes you laugh, I hope it's because you see how amazing she is." The courtroom filled with quiet laughter and sniffles at the same time. The judge smiled, then folded the letter slowly and placed it on his desk. He looked at Lily and said, "That might be the most honest testimony I've ever heard in this courtroom." Eric looked furious. His jaw tightened, his face red. "Your Honor," he said sharply, "this is completely irrelevant. This isn't evidence. It's just a child's opinion." Judge Harper turned his gaze to Eric, his voice calm but firm. "Mr. Carter, sometimes truth doesn't come from lawyers or documents. Sometimes it comes from the people who live with the consequences of our decisions. Your daughter's words tell me more about your family than any of these files ever could." Eric's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He slumped back into his chair, crossing his arms. His confidence was gone, replaced by quiet anger. The courtroom had shifted. Everyone could feel it. The balance had changed, not through shouting or accusations, but through a 15-year-old girl's honesty. Laura looked at her daughter through tears. Her voice trembled when she whispered, "You didn't have to do that." Lily smiled softly. "I wanted to, Mom." Judge Harper looked between them, his expression thoughtful. "This case isn't about who earns more or who looks better on paper," he said gently. "It's about who provides love, stability, and care. And from what I've read, and what I've seen, there's no question where that comes from." He took a deep breath and added, "But before I make any final statements, I want both parties to take a moment and reflect on what's really important here." The courtroom remained silent as everyone processed his words. Eric looked down at the table, his expression unreadable. Laura wiped her eyes and squeezed Lily's hand again. There was relief in her eyes now, a small spark of hope that hadn't been there before. Judge Harper stood up, signaling a short recess. "We'll take 10 minutes, he said. "And Miss Carter," he added, smiling kindly at Lily, "thank you for reminding us all what really matters. As the judge left the room, quiet conversations broke out. People smiled at Laura as they passed, some even whispering kind words. Eric avoided everyone's eyes. Laura turned to Lily, brushing away a tear from her daughter's cheek. "You were brave," she said softly. Lily shrugged, her face pink with embarrassment. "I just told the truth." Her mother smiled, the first real smile she had shown in months. "Sometimes, that's the bravest thing of all," she said. For the first time that day, the courtroom didn't feel heavy anymore. The air was lighter. Laughter had broken through the sadness, and love had found its way into the cold walls of justice. Lily sat quietly beside her mom, her heart steady now. She didn't know what the judge's final decision would be, but for the first time, she believed it might be fair. The next morning, the courtroom was filled again, and this time the air felt even heavier. The whispers spread among the people sitting in the back rows. Everyone had heard about the letter, the one Lily had handed to the judge. But no one knew what it said. Judge Harper sat in his chair, calm but focused, his eyes glancing at the letter lying neatly on his desk. Laura sat quietly beside her lawyer, her hands trembling slightly. Eric stood with a smug grin, pretending to be confident, though something in his eyes showed that he was nervous. He had no idea what his daughter had written, but he feared it might expose something he didn't want anyone to know. Lily sat between her mother and the lawyer. She looked smaller than she felt yesterday, but there was a spark in her eyes, something strong and brave. She had written that letter with all her heart. It wasn't just a message, it was her truth, and she knew it would speak louder than anything her father had said. When Judge Harper cleared his throat, the room went silent. He adjusted his glasses, picked up the envelope, and carefully unfolded the letter. The sound of the paper made every heartbeat in the room louder. Laura held her breath. Eric crossed his arms, trying to look unfazed. The judge started reading silently at first, his lips pressing together, then slowly began to smile. His expression softened, then turned into something close to amusement. Finally, he let out a quiet laugh. The courtroom froze. The sound of the judge laughing in the middle of such a serious case shocked everyone. Eric blinked in disbelief. Laura's eyes widened. Even Lily's mouth opened slightly. The judge coughed and tried to regain his composure, but it was too late, the laughter had already spread. A few people in the audience chuckled, then more joined in, unable to stop themselves. "Mr. Eric," the judge finally said, still trying to suppress a grin. "Your daughter has quite the way with words." Eric frowned, his face turning red. "What does that mean?" The judge looked at him directly. "It means she sees things very clearly for her age. And she wrote something that, quite frankly, this court needed to hear." Laura looked at Lily, tears filling her eyes. She wanted to hug her right then and there. Eric, on the other hand, seemed ready to explode. "What did she write?" he demanded. Judge Harper took a deep breath and said, "I think it would be better if I read it aloud." The crowd leaned forward. Lily's heart pounded. She had written it honestly, but now, hearing it out loud was something she hadn't expected. The judge began to read, "My name is Lily, and I'm the daughter of Laura and Eric. I know this is a divorce case, and I know my parents don't agree on many things. But I wanted to say something as the one who has to live with their choices. My dad says my mom can't take care of me, but I see her working every day, smiling even when she's tired, and helping others even when no one helps her. My dad says she's weak, but I've seen her stand tall when she was breaking inside. And my dad says he's strong, but strength isn't about yelling, it's about kindness." The courtroom was silent. The judge's voice was calm, but the weight of Lily's words filled every corner of the room. Even Eric couldn't look up. His face turned pale. The judge continued reading, his tone softening. "I just want both of my parents to be happy, but I don't think you can be happy if you keep hurting people. So, I hope this court sees who my mom really is. She doesn't need to win this case to prove she's good, she already is. I love my dad, but I love the truth more." When Judge Harper finished, he looked at Lily. There was pride in his eyes, the kind a teacher gives to a student who has taught him something new. The crowd stayed silent for a long moment, and then a quiet murmur began. Someone whispered, "She's brave." Another said, "What a letter." Laura couldn't hold back her tears anymore. She covered her face, shaking with emotion. The lawyer beside her gently patted her shoulder. Eric stood frozen, his pride shattered. He opened his mouth to say something, but nothing came out. Judge Harper finally leaned back and said softly, "This letter has said more than any of us could. Sometimes, truth comes from the smallest voices." He turned toward Eric. "And Mr. Eric, I suggest you listen to your daughter more often." Eric looked at Lily, and for the first time, his eyes softened. Maybe it was guilt, maybe regret. But there was no denying the power of that moment. As the court adjourned for the day, Laura hugged Lily tightly. "You were amazing," she whispered. Lily smiled through her tears. "I just told the truth, Mom." Outside the courthouse, the sky was bright and clear. For the first time in months, Laura felt hope. The pain wasn't gone, but something had changed. She wasn't just a mother fighting for her dignity anymore, she was the woman her daughter believed in. And that was enough to make her strong again. When court resumed the next day, there was a different kind of silence in the room. It wasn't the heavy silence of anger or tension, but one filled with curiosity and quiet respect. The story of Lily's letter had spread around town. Reporters waited outside the courthouse, though the judge had not allowed them inside. Everyone wanted to know what the little girl had written that made a judge laugh and a courtroom cry. Laura walked in holding Lily's hand. Her steps were slow but steady. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen. Eric followed a few steps behind them. His face was serious, his jaw set tight. He hadn't said a word to either of them since yesterday. Deep down, he wasn't angry at his daughter, he was embarrassed. He didn't like being the one everyone was whispering about. Judge Harper entered the room and nodded to everyone. He looked calm, but there was a warmth in his eyes when he looked at Lily. "Good morning," he said. "Before we continue, I want to thank everyone for keeping a respectful tone yesterday. It's not often we see honesty like we did." He shuffled through his papers and looked up again. "Today, we'll be finishing this case. But before I give my final judgment, I think there's something important both parties should hear." The judge leaned forward, folding his hands. "Mr. Carter," he began, "yesterday your daughter reminded us of something simple: kindness and care matter more than wealth or pride. Family courts don't just deal with property or money, they deal with lives, hearts, and futures." Eric shifted uncomfortably in his seat but said nothing. Judge Harper continued. "You spoke harshly about your wife's abilities, her job, and her character. Yet, your daughter's letter showed us that she sees her mother as strong, caring, and full of love. That kind of respect from a child isn't earned through words, it's earned through years of small sacrifices." Laura lowered her head, tears welling in her eyes again. She hadn't wanted to cry in front of everyone, but the judge's words touched something deep in her heart. Judge Harper turned his attention to her. "Mrs. Carter, it's clear you've done your best, and your daughter's loyalty is a reflection of your effort. You may not have everything, but what you do have, love, patience, and trust, means more than anything." The courtroom was still. Every word felt heavy, meaningful. Eric's lawyer shifted in his chair, clearly realizing the direction things were going. Eric's face softened slightly. He looked at Lily, who met his gaze with calm eyes. There was no anger in her expression, only quiet disappointment. The judge spoke again. "After reviewing the testimony, the evidence, and this letter, I have decided that primary custody will be awarded to Mrs. Carter." A soft gasp spread through the room. Laura pressed her hands over her mouth. Lily's eyes widened, then she turned to her mother and hugged her tightly. Laura held her close, her shoulders shaking. Tears ran freely down her cheeks. Judge Harper continued. "Mr. Carter, you will still have visitation rights and will be encouraged to remain part of your daughter's life. But I hope this experience teaches you something about the kind of father you can still choose to be." Eric looked down, silent. His pride had been his shield for so long, and now it was gone. He nodded slowly, his voice quiet. I understand, Your Honor. The judge nodded back. Good. I believe you love your daughter, Mr. Carter. But love must show through actions, not arguments. As the gavel came down, the case was officially over. The crowd began to file out quietly, whispering among themselves. Many stopped to smile at Laura and Lily, offering small nods of respect. Even some who had come out of curiosity seemed moved. Eric stood there for a long moment before walking toward his ex-wife and daughter. He stopped a few feet away, uncertain. Laura looked up, still holding Lily's hand. He spoke softly. Lily. I read your letter last night. His voice cracked slightly. You're right. I haven't been fair. I've been angry at the wrong person. Lily looked at him with tears in her eyes. I just wanted you to stop hurting Mom, she said quietly. I still love you, Dad. Eric swallowed hard. I know, he said, his eyes glistening. And I love you too. I'm sorry for everything. Laura stood silently. There was no anger left in her eyes, only exhaustion and quiet peace. She didn't say much, she didn't need to. Eric nodded to her before walking away slowly, shoulders heavy but his face softer than it had been in years. Outside, the autumn wind was cool. The leaves danced across the courthouse steps. Laura stepped out with Lily, taking a deep breath. The weight that had pressed on her for months finally lifted. Lily smiled up at her. You think everything will be okay, now, she asked. Laura squeezed her hand gently. I think we're going to be okay, she said. Because we have each other. The mother and daughter walked toward their car, the morning sunlight painting their faces in gold. Behind them, the courthouse doors closed quietly, a chapter ending, a new one beginning. And though the pain of the past still lingered, the strength of their bond had proven stronger than anything Eric's pride could ever break. Days passed after the court decision, but the feelings from that day lingered in everyone's hearts. The small town had already started talking about it, how a 15-year-old girl's letter had changed everything. People mentioned it in cafes, at grocery stores, even at schools. But for Laura and Lily, the noise of the outside world didn't matter. What mattered was the peace they felt at home. Laura's small apartment was filled with warmth that weekend. The scent of pancakes and hot chocolate filled the air. Lily sat at the kitchen table, drawing in her notebook while her mother cooked breakfast. For the first time in a long time, laughter filled the room. It wasn't loud or forced, it was real. Want chocolate chips in yours? Laura asked, flipping a pancake. Of course. Lily replied, grinning. You always make them better that way. Laura smiled and set a plate in front of her daughter. She watched her take a bite, then said softly, I still can't believe how brave you were that day. Lily looked down, her cheeks turning pink. I was just tired of seeing you hurt, Mom. Laura reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You didn't just stand up for me. You reminded me who I am. Her voice trembled slightly. I forgot for a while that I was strong. Lily smiled. You've always been strong, Mom. You just didn't see it. Outside, the sun shone through the window, casting golden light across the room. It felt like a new beginning. Later that day, a soft knock sounded at the door. Laura hesitated for a moment before opening it. Standing there was Eric. He looked different, less polished, more tired. But there was something genuine in his eyes. Hey, he said quietly. Laura nodded slowly. Hi. He held out a small paper bag. I brought something for Lily. Just her favorite snacks. Laura hesitated, then opened the door wider. Come in. Eric stepped inside, looking around awkwardly. The apartment was small but cozy, plants on the windowsill, a few pictures on the wall, and a stack of books on the coffee table. Lily appeared from her room and froze when she saw him. Hi, Dad, she said cautiously. Hey, sweetheart, he said, managing a small smile. How are you? I'm good, Lily replied. Mom made pancakes. He chuckled softly. Of course she did. She's been making those since forever. The three of them sat down, and for a moment, no one spoke. The silence wasn't angry, it was fragile, like something that could break easily. Eric cleared his throat. I just wanted to say thank you, he said finally, looking at Laura. For how you handled everything. I didn't make it easy. Laura shook her head. It's over now. We just need to move forward. He nodded. Yeah. I also wanted to tell you, Lily, that I read your letter again. He looked directly at his daughter. You made me think a lot. I've been so focused on being right that I forgot to be kind. Lily's eyes softened. I didn't mean to hurt you, Dad. He shook his head quickly. You didn't. You made me see myself. Anne. I didn't like what I saw. But maybe that's what I needed. Laura watched the exchange quietly. She could see that something had changed in him. Maybe not completely, but enough to make a difference. They talked for a while, about school, about Lily's friends, about simple things. When Eric finally stood up to leave, he said, I'll pick her up next weekend, if that's okay. Laura nodded. That's fine. He looked at both of them one last time. Thank you. For giving me another chance. When the door closed, Lily looked at her mother. Do you think he really means it? Laura sighed softly. I think he's trying. And that's a start. That night, Lily lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She thought about the courtroom, the letter, her dad's face when he heard her words. She didn't regret anything. She knew she had spoken from the heart, and maybe that was enough to heal something broken. In the living room, Laura sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the quiet street outside. She thought about how everything had changed, not just the case, but her own heart. She wasn't afraid anymore. She had faced her worst day and found light in it. And that light came from her daughter. Before going to bed, she peeked into Lily's room. The girl was asleep, her face peaceful, one hand resting near her notebook. On the open page were doodles and a few words written in careful handwriting. Home is not where you live. It's where someone loves you. Laura smiled, tears filling her eyes again. She whispered softly, You're right, sweetheart. Then she turned off the light, knowing that no matter what came next, they were going to be okay. The night outside was calm, and for the first time in a long time, Laura slept without fear. The laughter, the tears, the letter, it had all led to this moment of peace. And sometimes, peace was the most beautiful ending of all. A few months later, the leaves had turned golden and the air carried the soft chill of fall. The world outside had moved on from the courtroom story, but for Laura and Lily, life had quietly begun to heal. They had fallen into a rhythm that felt warm and new. School for Lily, work for Laura, and calm evenings filled with laughter, homework, and the smell of fresh coffee. One Saturday morning, Laura woke up to the sound of sizzling in the kitchen. She hurried out, worried something might be burning, only to stop in surprise. Lily stood by the stove, wearing her mom's oversized apron, flipping pancakes with a grin. Good morning. Lily said proudly. I'm making breakfast. Laura smiled, her heart full. You're turning into me, she teased gently. Maybe, Lily said, laughing. But I wanted to surprise you. You always make pancakes for me. I thought it was your turn. They sat down together, and Laura realized how much had changed. The heaviness that used to hang over their mornings was gone. What replaced it was simple joy. Every small moment mattered now, the laughter, the quiet talks, the togetherness. As they ate, there was a knock on the door. Lily got up to answer it, and standing there was Eric. He looked different again. His hair was a little messy, and there was a gentleness in his smile that hadn't been there before. Hey, kiddo, he said warmly. Dad. Lily exclaimed, running into his arms. Laura stood up slowly. You're early. Eric nodded. Yeah, I thought maybe we could all go out today. There's a fall fair in town. I got tickets. He looked a little uncertain as he added, if that's okay, with you. Laura hesitated for a second, then nodded. Sure. I think Lily would love that. Lily clapped her hands. Can we really? That sounds fun. The three of them spent the afternoon together. The fair was filled with music, the smell of caramel corn, and laughter. Lily won a small teddy bear at one of the booths, and Eric carried it for her proudly. Laura watched them, feeling a strange sense of peace. It wasn't perfect. It might never be. But it was progress. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, they sat on a bench eating ice cream. Lily leaned against her mother, her head resting on her shoulder. Eric looked at them both and said softly, you know, I used to think being strong meant never backing down. But I was wrong. Strength is what you both have. Laura looked at him, surprised by his honesty. It's never too late to learn, she said gently. He nodded, smiling faintly. I know. I just wish I'd learned it sooner. Lily looked up, her eyes bright. At least you know now, Dad. He chuckled quietly. You're right. You're always right, huh? They all laughed. The sound carried through the cool evening air, blending with the fair's music and fading into the soft hum of the crowd. Later that night, after they got home, Laura tucked Lily into bed. Did you have fun today? She asked. Lily nodded sleepily. Yeah. It felt nice. Like we're a family again, in a different way. Laura brushed her hair gently. That's because we are, she said softly. Family doesn't always stay the same. Sometimes it changes, but the love stays. Lily smiled with her eyes closed. I'm glad you and Dad are okay, now. Laura kissed her forehead. Me too. When Lily fell asleep, Laura sat by the window with a blanket around her shoulders. The moonlight poured through the glass, silver and soft. She thought about everything that had happened, the courtroom, the letter, the pain, the laughter. So much had broken that day, but something new had begun too. In the quiet of the night, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Eric, thank you, for everything. Tell Lily I'm proud of her. Laura smiled as she typed back, she'll love to hear that. And thank you, for trying. She looked out at the stars and whispered, we made it, Lily. The wind carried her words away, gentle and kind. The world outside was peaceful again. In her heart, Laura knew that life would still bring challenges. There would be hard days, maybe more arguments, but there would also be laughter and forgiveness. Because love wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up, about trying, about believing things could get better. And as the night deepened, the house remained filled with quiet warmth, the kind that only comes after surviving a storm. Laura closed her eyes, grateful for everything, even the hard days. Because they had led her here, to a place where she could finally breathe, laugh, and hope again. The story of a letter that once made a courtroom laugh had ended not with noise, but with peace. And sometimes, peace is the best ending any story could have.